Welcome to the Addendum, a thing added. On this podcast, Pastor Eric Williams will add to, clarify, and supplement the most recent teachings at Fellowship Renewed Church.
I'd like to start off our time today talking a little bit about typology, and I'd like to contrast typology with allegory. Sometimes these two ideas get confused, muddled together. They are distinct. They are different. And the reason I want to talk a little bit about this is because on Sunday, I had mentioned that physical circumcision was a type leading towards something in the New Testament, but we didn't really discuss too much about how types work. Now, we have in the past, but I wanted to just add a little bit to that conversation today by making a clear distinction between allegory and typology. And then I'd like to talk a little bit more about circumcision, specifically coming from some Old Testament text. Okay, so first, to make this distinction, I'd like to read a few quotes from an article. It's very clear, very helpful. It was written by Brent Parker, and the name of it tells you everything. The name of the article is The Differences Between Typology and Allegory. Well, that's exactly what we want, isn't it? Okay, so here's the first quote. At a most basic level, an allegory is to mean something other than what one says. Allegory, as a literary form, is an extended metaphor or a trope that illustrates a story or conveys a truth by personifying abstract concepts. Okay, so we'll take that as allegory. All right, I'm going to just continue on with the quote. There's just one more here. He says, biblical types are particular Old Testament persons, events, actions, and institutions that God has providentially intended and invested to correspond to, foreshadow, and prefigure escalated and intensified New Testament realities, which we call antitypes. The persons, events, and institutions have their own meaning in the historical context in which they lived or occurred, and yet have a typological function in pointing forward to the greater realities to come. When thinking of allegory as a genre, this historical aspect in reality is not present. And so maybe let me say this in a different way. Okay, of course, I've ended my quote there. So there's a distinction between allegory and typology. With allegory, an author is saying something other than what he intends, but in typology, there are persons, places, institutions, things that God, by his own providential means, through revelation, has intended for these things to prefigure something that would come at a later time, specifically in the New Testament and under the New Covenant. Okay? So the thing that existed in the Old Testament has real historical function. It is real. But in considering allegory, this is not true. So allegory has no historical bearing, whereas typology does. Typology is intended by God to point forward to a future reality, whereas allegory is not intended to do so. So let's make sure that we're making a proper distinction between the two ideas. What are we talking about? We're talking about typology, specifically relating to the type that was external physical circumcision, pointing forward to a new covenant reality, which is the circumcision of the heart. Okay? Before we continue, let me read Colossians 2:11 through 17. It says, in him also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of flesh, by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question of food and drink with regard to festival or new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Okay? So he goes into this long discussion about circumcision, and then he adds, in addition, let no one pass judgment in question of you with regard to these things, and food and drink, and a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath, or all these external physical things. They were a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Now just think about that difference between shadow and substance. A shadow is a real thing, right? A shadow is a thing in and of itself, all right? But the shadow only exists because the real substance exists, all right? In the Old Testament, the shadow was seen, but the substance was not yet there, but the shadow was already being cast. God was doing the casting because he was planning for, by his own sovereign and providential means, for the Messiah, the substance of all these things to come. In addition, all the new covenant realities, including the sending of the Spirit of God. So what I'd like to do is make this connection about shadows and substance, types, and the antitype. Just remember, a type is the old covenant shadow, and the antitype is the new covenant reality. Okay? That's how we'll define it for our time together, okay? The type is the old covenant shadow. The antitype is the new covenant substance reality. All right? Keep that in mind. Let's go back to the Old Testament and let's look at some of the shadows. But how I want to direct our time is not so much in the institution of circumcision, but in the way that God was speaking about circumcision. And you can tell in what I'm going to read here and the connections that we're going to make is that in looking at the shadow, God is actually pointing people to say, don't you realize that there's more to this thing of circumcision than the shadow that you currently see? God is pointing them toward a future reality, to the substance of the thing that we now have in Christ in the new covenant. I want you to see it. And so I'm going to give you a few texts and make those connections today. First, we'll look back at Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 12 through 17. It says, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth and all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them. You above all peoples, as you are this day." Verse 16, "Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no longer stubborn. For the Lord your God is God of gods, Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe." Okay, so because he is their covenant God, he says, I require of you that you do a few things, that you fear the Lord, you walk in my ways, that you love me, that you serve me with all your heart and your soul, that you keep my commandments and statutes, which I'm commanding you this day for your good. So God is making requirements of them. And so he says, in order to fulfill that, then here's what you need to do. Verse 16, circumcise your heart. And if you would circumcise your heart, then you would no longer be stubborn, and you would be able to do all these things that I'm requiring of you. So the uncircumcised or the circumcised heart is what God is requiring. So let's just set these two categories. Number one, a circumcised heart is someone that fears God, walks in all his ways, loves him, serves him with all their heart and soul, and keeps his commandments. An uncircumcised heart, then, would be someone that does not fear God, does not walk in his ways, does not love him, does not serve him with all their heart and soul, and does not keep God's commandments. Okay? Let's fast forward just a little bit. Same book, Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 6. And when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and you return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you with all your heart and all your soul, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you. He will gather you from all the peoples where the Lord God has scattered you, if your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, and from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will take you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it, and he will make you more prosperous and numerous than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, that you may live. Okay, so there are further requirements. So God is saying that in order to live, you must have a circumcised heart. And a circumcised heart is one that knows God, fears God, does all that God commands. Ultimately, it's summarized in, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. That's a summary of what it is for a person to have a circumcised heart. Okay, we keep going. So this was in the Exodus period, Exodus conquest period, the giving of the law. This is Moses, Joshua, the people going to take the land of Canaan, the 40 years of wilderness walking. Okay, so we're in that time period, but we have to fast forward in time, nearly 1,000 years, and we're coming to the time of Jeremiah, and this is directly preceding the Babylonian conquest of the people of Judah. So the northern kingdom has already been taken down by the Assyrians, and so you have the people in the southern kingdom, Judah, who are left, and God is now bringing judgment upon the people of Judah, southern kingdom of Israel, and he is doing that by means of the Babylonians, who will come and destroy them, lead them into captivity. Jeremiah is prophesying to the people of God at this time, and listen to what Jeremiah says. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. I'm just going to pause right there. That's through verse 32. We're immediately being transported to that time, that passage that we just read in Deuteronomy. That's what Jeremiah is referencing. So God made a covenant with the people saying, keep my commandments, have a circumcised heart, right? Love me with all your heart and all your soul. And they couldn't do it. They were incapable. They were incapable of loving the Lord in the way that he intended, that he required. So what has come upon them at this time in history? Judgment. The northern kingdom has already been judged. The southern kingdom is now being judged because they were incapable of keeping the covenant with God, to love the Lord their God completely. They had uncircumcised hearts. Verse 33, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. So there's a new covenant coming, and it's not going to be like that covenant. It's going to be a different type of covenant. This is the covenant that I will make with them after these days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God. They shall be my people. No longer shall each one teach his neighbor and his brothers, saying, know the Lord, because they will all know me. From the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord, for I will forgive their iniquity. I will remember their sin no more. So there is a time coming when God is going to establish a covenant with the people, and it won't be necessary anymore for the covenant people to look at the other covenant people and say, know the Lord, you need to know him, you need to love him, because all of them will already know him, because they will all have the law of God written on their hearts. They will be his people, and they will know the Lord. All right, we go forward one more chapter in Jeremiah 32, beginning in verse 38. They shall be my people. I will be their God. Remember, that's the covenant formula. I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever. for their own good and for the good of their children after them. I will make with them an everlasting covenant, that I will not turn away from doing good to them. I will put the fear of me in their hearts, that they may not turn from me. I will rejoice in doing good for them. I will plant them in this land in faithfulness with all my heart and my soul. Okay, so what is God going to do in this time with this everlasting covenant that's coming? He is going to put the fear of himself in the hearts of the people. That takes a circumcised heart to have that. We already discussed that. Those who fear the Lord are those who have circumcised hearts. If you don't have a circumcised heart, there is no fear of God in you. And God will keep them. They have the fear of God in their hearts because God put it there, and they're not going to turn from God because God himself has circumcised their heart. And if you have a circumcised heart, you don't turn from God because you have the fear of God. You have faith in God. All these things work together. Okay. We're going to go just a little bit forward in time to Ezekiel. Ezekiel is somewhat contemporary with Jeremiah. There's an overlap in their prophetic career. But just to give you ballpark, where are we at in history? We're in the late 600s, so like 630 BC up to about 570 BC in that time period. And 586 BC is destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and Babylonian captivity. That's when all that's happening. So we're right there, but Ezekiel is closer, even closer than Jeremiah, to the destruction of Jerusalem and Babylonian captivity. So judgment is looming in the air. So here's what Ezekiel has to say. Ezekiel 36:22. Therefore say to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, it is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I am about to act, but for my sake and my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations to which you came. I will vindicate the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, which you have profaned among them. And the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the Lord God, when through you I vindicate my holiness before their eyes. I will take you from the nations, I will gather you from the countries and bring you into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean from all your uncleanness, and from your idols I will cleanse you. Now listen to this, verse 26. And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you. I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and be careful to obey my rules. I'll skip down to verse 32. It is not for your sake that I will act. Let it be known. Be ashamed and confounded, O house of Israel. Okay, so there is judgment. There is judgment, but also hope of future redemption and promise. It is this same new covenant that Jeremiah was speaking of. There is a time coming when God will make an everlasting covenant with the people, and he will circumcise their hearts himself. He will put the fear of him in the people. He will do it. He will give them a new heart. He will give them a new spirit, and we have some additional information here. He will put his own spirit within them. It's not that he will just renew the human spirit. He will put his own spirit within the person. And it is in this way that they are careful to walk in his ways and careful to obey his rules. But as it stands, be ashamed, people, because you have broken my covenant and profaned my name among the nations. Okay, fast forward in time again, close to 200 years. Not close to 200 years. About 100 years. If we're going to the career of Joel, okay, I'm placing Joel about 500, and we were about at 600 BC. Okay, so you have Babylonian captivity, and then you have there's a little bit of debate about Joel. Is why I'm saying this. I'm going to place Joel, however, at about 500 BC. Okay, and if this is the case, then Joel is writing after these events, kind of reflecting on what God did in judgment to the people. Okay, that's kind of a different conversation. But regardless, Joel is writing after Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And what does he have to say? Well, he's going to pick up on this same idea. And I'd like to read chapter 2, verses 26 through 29. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you, and my people shall never again be put to shame. I'll just pause there and say, do you remember how that passage in Ezekiel just ended? Be ashamed, be confounded. But it's saying here in Joel, never again shall my people be put to shame. Now they were put to shame, but never again will they be put to shame. Why? Verse 27, you shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and that there is none else. My people shall never again be put to shame, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your younger men shall see visions. Even on male and female servants in those days I will pour out my spirit. So there it is again. In order to walk in the ways of God, to know God, to fear God, you have to have a circumcised heart. God is going to circumcise the hearts of the people by means of pouring his spirit into them. All right? He's promising the pouring out of the Spirit onto the people. And it is in this way that he will circumcise the hearts of the people. Now, in Acts 2, Peter confirms that this was fulfilled on the day of Pentecost, when God poured out his Spirit. There's no question about that. All right? Let me just make a little summary here. God demands that people have a circumcised heart. Okay, someone that fears him, walks in his ways, loves him, serves him with all their heart and soul. If a person does not have a circumcised heart, that person will be put to shame and judged by God. God promised that he himself would circumcise the hearts of the people. God further identifies that he will circumcise the hearts of the people by putting his Spirit within them. So we ask, what is the question of the pouring, or what is the purpose of the pouring out of the Spirit? It is to circumcise the hearts of the people, that they might know God, that they might fear him, that their hearts might be turned to him, right? What about these signs and wonders? Well, the signs and wonders signify that God has accomplished what he intended, that he did what he said he was going to do, all right? Last passage I'll read today. We'll go all the way over to Romans 2. Romans 2:25. Listen to how it connects all these things together. Romans 2:25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. What kind of circumcision is he talking about? He's talking about external circumcision. Mark yourself out as a person who belongs to God, and you say, yes, I belong to him and I'm following the law. But Paul says, but if you break the law, which is confirm that no one can keep the law in and of themselves, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So, if a man who is uncircumcised physically keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision physically be regarded as circumcision? In what way? He's not physically circumcised, he's circumcised in another way, because external physical circumcision was pointing forward to an internal spiritual circumcision. And that is how an uncircumcised person can be circumcised, because that's the point of circumcision, has always been about circumcision of the heart. How does circumcision of the heart happen? He continues, verse 27. He who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you, and have the written code in circumcision but break the law. No one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. Now, if you just wait there for a second, circumcision was outward and physical, but Paul is saying, no, it's not. So Paul is saying circumcision was a shadow. The substance belongs to something of the new covenant. A Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. So there it is. That's the full connection. That's where I wanted to take us today. There it is. The shadow that we see in the Old Covenant of external physical circumcision has always been pointing toward a future reality when God himself would circumcise the hearts of his people. And how would he do it? By his own Spirit that he would put within them.
Thank you for joining us on the Addendum podcast. For more information about Fellowship Renewed Church, visit frcsparta.com. Please join us for next week's episode.